Ashford Lane was the kind of street people described as peaceful without thinking twice about what that word really meant. Wide sidewalks curved gently past trimmed hedges and evenly spaced maple trees. Brick colonial homes stood in quiet symmetry, each with polished brass numbers beside freshly painted doors. Porch lights flickered on automatically as the sun dipped lower, bathing the neighborhood in a soft amber glow. It was 7:42 p.m. The air carried the faint scent of cut grass and distant charcoal grills. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked once, then settled. A basketball thudded rhythmically in a driveway before going silent. Maya Reynolds stood barefoot at the edge of her driveway, phone in hand. She had changed out of her work clothes less than 20 minutes earlier. The black robe that had rested on her shoulders all day now hung neatly inside her bedroom closet. In its place, grey cotton sweatpants, a slightly oversized navy hoodie from Howard University, and a silk scarf tied carefully around her hair. She looked like anyone unwinding after work, because that's exactly what she was doing. Her phone screen glowed against the dimming sky. The delivery app refreshed again. Driver is nearby. She exhaled, relieved. It had been a long day in court. Sentencing arguments, pre-trial motions, a defense attorney who wouldn't stop repeating himself. The weight of decisions that affected real lives still lingered quietly in the back of her mind. Tonight, she didn't want to think about mandatory minimums or appellate standards. She wanted pad thai, nothing complicated, nothing heavy, just dinner. She shifted her weight slightly, glancing down the street for headlights that might signal her delivery driver's arrival. The pavement beneath her feet still held warmth from the day's sun. The brick exterior of her home glowed softly behind her. Across the street, curtains moved subtly in an upstairs window. Evening routines were underway. Families settling in. Televisions turning on. Dishes clinking. Maya lived here. Not recently moved. Not renting temporarily. Not visiting. Lived here. Her name was etched into the deed filed with the county. The mortgage documents were signed in her handwriting. The mailbox by the curb bore the name Reynolds, in small engraved lettering. She had chosen this house carefully 3 years earlier. Quiet enough for privacy, close enough to downtown for convenience, safe enough that she rarely thought about safety at all. That was the point. Peace wasn't something she took for granted. It was something she had earned through decades of discipline, law school nights, clerkships, arguments in packed courtrooms, and years of proving she belonged in spaces where people often questioned her presence before they questioned her credentials. A faint hum of an engine drifted toward her. She didn't pay attention at first. Cars passed on Ashford Lane all the time. But this one didn't pass. It slowed. The headlights lingered just a second too long, and though she didn't yet realize it, the quiet rhythm of her evening had already begun to change. Officer Daniel Mercer had been on the evening shift for nearly 3 hours when he turned onto Ashford Lane. The sun was sinking low enough to blur the edges of the houses in gold light. It was that in-between time, not quite day, not fully night, when shadows stretched longer than they should. Mercer liked this part of patrol. It felt quiet, controlled, predictable. Dispatch had mentioned earlier in the week that a homeowner reported someone walking slowly past properties 2 nights in a row. No theft, no break-ins, just a feeling, a tone in the caller's voice that suggested discomfort. That was enough for Mercer. He considered himself observant, proactive, the kind of officer who prevented problems before they happened. As he rolled down Ashford Lane at 18 miles per hour, his eyes moved methodically, porch lights, parked vehicles, dark windows. Then he saw her, a woman standing near the edge of a driveway, barefoot, phone in hand. Not pacing, not knocking on doors, not peering into windows, just standing. But she wasn't walking into a house either. She wasn't unloading groceries. She wasn't unlocking a car. She was simply there. Mercer eased his foot off the accelerator. Something about the image lingered. The hoodie, the relaxed posture, the fact that she was outside rather than inside at that hour. His mind did what human minds do. It filled gaps with assumptions. Most homeowners in this neighborhood, he thought, were inside by now. Families eating dinner, professionals commuting home earlier. Standing outside like that, it didn't fit the picture in his head. He slowed the cruiser, The engine's hum dropped to a quiet crawl. The headlights illuminated her driveway more clearly. Now clean, concrete, trimmed lawn, a late-model sedan parked near the garage. Nothing out of place. Still, he didn't drive on. He watched her for 5 seconds. 10. She refreshed her phone screen, glanced down the road, waiting. For what? The memory of the earlier call replayed in his head. Just didn't look like they belonged. The caller had said, belonged. Mercer didn't consciously think about the word, but it hovered somewhere beneath the surface. He clicked his body camera on. The small red light blinked steadily. He told himself this was routine. If she lived there, it would take 30 seconds to confirm. If she didn't, maybe he'd prevent something. He pulled the cruiser closer to the curb. The tires rolled softly against the asphalt before coming to a stop parallel to her driveway. From his angle, he could see the brass numbers mounted beside the front door. Everything about the house suggested ownership, stability, investment. But he was already committed to the stop. He placed the vehicle in park. For a brief second, he considered just moving on. No crime was visible. No distress call had come from this address. She wasn't acting erratically. Still, he opened the door. The weight of the cruiser shifted as his boots hit pavement. Evening air brushed against his uniform. She looked up. Her expression wasn't nervous. It wasn't defensive. It was confused. And in that moment, before a single word was spoken, the entire trajectory of the evening quietly locked into place. "Evening, ma'am." His voice carried the controlled firmness of someone used to being obeyed. Maya looked up from her phone, momentarily disoriented. For a split second, she assumed he might be asking for directions. "Good evening," she replied evenly. Officer Mercer stopped a few feet from the driveway, just outside what most people would consider personal space, but close enough to establish authority. His cruiser idled behind him, headlights still cutting across the lawn. "Do you live here?" The question was simple. The tone wasn't. Maya blinked once. "Yes." A brief pause hung between them, the kind that feels heavier than it should. "Can I see some identification?" he asked. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "I'm sorry, for what reason?" "We've had reports of suspicious activity in the area." She glanced casually up and down the street. Quiet homes, porch lights glowing. No movement except a curtain shifting across the road. "What kind of suspicious activity?" "Just general reports," he said. "People walking around properties, checking things out. And what about me suggests that?" Her tone wasn't combative. It was precise. He didn't answer directly. "I just need to confirm you live here." She shifted her weight, crossing her arms loosely, not defensive, just thoughtful. "Officer, I'm standing in my driveway." "Yes, ma'am. And I'm asking you to identify yourself." She studied him carefully now. His badge number, the body camera mounted at his chest. "Am I being detained?" The question landed differently. Mercer's jaw tightened. "No." "Then I'm not obligated to provide identification." He adjusted his stance. Refusing to identify yourself during an investigation can escalate things. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes sharpened. "An investigation of what exactly?" "Suspicious behavior." She nodded once. "What behavior?" "You were standing outside." There it was. The answer hung awkwardly between them. She let a full second pass. "Standing outside my home." "Yes, ma'am." She glanced down at her bare feet briefly, almost as if grounding herself. "I'm waiting for a food delivery." "That may be," he replied, "but we still need to confirm residency." The word need carried weight, authority, finality. She took a slow breath. "Officer, you have no probable cause to suspect I've committed a crime. Standing on private property is not grounds for detention." He stepped half a pace closer. "I'm asking for cooperation. And I'm asking for legal justification." Across the street, a porch light clicked on. A door opened slightly. Someone was watching now. Mercer felt the subtle pressure of an audience. "Ma'am, last chance. Show me your ID." "For what?" she asked calmly. "For failure to comply." Her gaze held steady. "I am not required to comply with an unlawful demand." The air shifted. The casual nature of the encounter was gone. This wasn't about identification anymore. It was about authority being questioned, and neither of them moved. The porch light above Maya's front door flickered fully on as dusk settled into evening. The warm glow illuminated the brick exterior behind her, casting long shadows across the driveway. Officer Mercer shifted his weight again, planting his boots more firmly on the pavement. The stance wasn't accidental. It was the posture of someone preparing to assert control. "Ma'am," he said, voice firmer now, "this doesn't have to be difficult." "It isn't difficult," she replied calmly. "It's straightforward." Across the street, the curtain moved again wider this time, a face briefly visible before disappearing. A phone screen glowed faintly in the upstairs window. Mercer noticed. An audience changes dynamics. It adds pressure. It makes backing down feel like losing. "You're refusing a lawful request," he said. "No," Maya responded evenly. "I'm declining an unlawful one." The distinction irritated him. He placed his hand lightly near his duty belt, not gripping, just resting. A subtle but deliberate gesture. "I'm investigating suspicious behavior." "What behavior?" she asked again. "You're standing outside a residence." "My residence." "You haven't proven that." She paused. "And you haven't proven otherwise." The engine of the cruiser continued to hum behind him, headlights still washing over the lower half of her lawn. He took another step closer. "If you don't provide ID, I can detain you until we verify." The word detain lingered in the air like humidity before a storm. "For what charge?" she asked. "Failure to identify during an investigation." She shook her head slowly. "That statute applies when someone is lawfully detained based on reasonable suspicion of a crime. You've articulated none." Her voice wasn't raised. It wasn't emotional. It was instructional. And that stung. Mercer felt the conversation slipping from routine into confrontation. "You're interfering," he said. "With what?" "With my investigation. By standing on my property." Yes, there it was again. The circular logic. A second patrol car turned onto Ashford Lane, headlights briefly cutting across both of them before parking behind Mercer's cruiser. "Back up." The sight seemed to solidify his resolve. He gestured toward the house. "If this is your home, proving it would take seconds, and surrendering constitutional protections should take none," she replied. Officer Cruz stepped out of the second vehicle, scanning the scene quickly. "What's the situation?" Cruz asked. "Refusal to identify." Mercer answered without breaking eye contact with Maya. Cruz studied Maya, her posture, the house, the driveway. "Ma'am, can you tell us your name?" Cruz asked, tone softer. "Maya met Harasses. Maya Reynolds." Cruz's expression flickered subtly, but she said nothing yet. Mercer exhaled sharply. "Last warning," he said. "For what?" Maya asked again. "For non-compliance." She didn't move. "I am not resisting. I am not fleeing. I am not suspected of a crime. You are escalating without legal basis." The word escalating hung heavily. The air felt tighter now. Neighbors were no longer pretending not to watch. Phones were clearly visible in 2 windows. And for the first time, a thin line of uncertainty flickered across Officer Mercer's face. Because escalation, once started, is hard to reverse. And he had just stepped across it. The word non-compliance lingered between them like a threat disguised as procedure. Officer Mercer straightened his shoulders, subtly adjusting his body camera as if preparing for documentation. His voice lowered, not louder, but firmer. "Ma'am, I'm giving you a lawful order." Maya didn't react to the shift in tone. "No," she replied evenly. "You're giving me an unlawful one." The second officer, Cruz, shifted slightly, sensing the tension hardening instead of dissolving. "Daniel," Cruz said quietly, "let's just confirm the address through dispatch." Mercer didn't look at her. "I'm handling it." Maya folded her arms loosely, not defensive, not aggressive, controlled. "Officer, if you believe I'm committing a crime, state it." He hesitated. "You match a description." "Of what?" "Someone reported earlier this week." "For doing what?" "Walking around properties." "And am I walking around properties?" Silence. She held his gaze. He cleared his throat. "You're being evasive." "I'm being precise." Across the street, a front door opened slightly. A man stepped onto his porch, pretending to check the mail. His phone was angled unmistakably toward the driveway. Mercer noticed. Public visibility adds pressure. Pressure fuels ego. "Ma'am," he said sharply. "Turn around." Cruz's head snapped slightly toward him. "Danielle, turn around," he repeated. "For what purpose?" Maya asked calmly. "For officer safety." "Officer safety from a barefoot woman holding a cell phone?" The sentence landed like a spotlight. Mercer's jaw tightened. "Do not make this harder than it needs to be." "I'm not," she replied. "You are." That was the moment the tone changed completely. His hand moved from resting near his belt to hovering over it. Not drawing, not threatening overtly, but close enough to signal seriousness. "If you fail to comply," he said slowly, "you may be detained." "For what charge?" she asked again. "Obstruction. Obstruction requires interference with a lawful investigation," she answered calmly. "You have not articulated one." Cruz stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Daniel, maybe we slow this down." He ignored her. "Ma'am. Final opportunity. Show me identification. Or place your hands behind your back." There it was. Not a suggestion anymore. A directive. Maya inhaled slowly. The porch light behind her illuminated her face clearly now. She looked neither angry nor afraid. Just steady. "You're about to unlawfully detain a citizen on her own property without probable cause," she said. "And your body camera is recording." For the first time, Mercer's eyes flicked briefly toward the camera on his chest. "A flicker. A calculation." Cruz leaned slightly toward him. Dispatch just confirmed the property owner name. Mercer didn't respond immediately. Cruz continued quietly. "It's Reynolds." The air shifted. Not fully, not yet, but something in Mercer's posture tightened, then loosened, almost imperceptibly. He had reached the line, and for a split second he knew it. The second cruiser's headlights dimmed as Officer Elena Cruz stepped fully into the scene. She had arrived expecting something routine, maybe a loitering complaint, maybe a misunderstanding. Instead, she walked into a standoff balanced on tone rather than action. Mercer stood rigid, jaw tight. Maya stood barefoot on her own driveway, posture relaxed but unyielding. Cruz immediately sensed it wasn't about safety anymore. It was about control. "What's the situation?" Cruz asked, scanning both faces. "Subject refusing to identify," Mercer replied without looking at her. Maya turned slightly toward Cruz. "I'm standing outside my home waiting for dinner. I asked if I was being detained. I've been given no lawful reason." Cruz studied the house behind her, the manicured yard, the porch light glowing warmly, the engraved mailbox by the curb. Nothing about this looked criminal. "Dispatch confirm the homeowner yet?" Cruz asked calmly. There was a pause. "They're checking," Mercer said. Cruz pressed her shoulder mic. "Dispatch, confirm registered owner of 1842 Ashford Lane." Static. Then, "Registered owner, Reynolds, Maya A." Cruz's eyes shifted slowly toward Maya. "Ma'am," she asked carefully, "are you Maya Reynolds?" "Yes." "Middle initial A?" "Yes." Mercer turned his head slightly. Cruz continued, "Ma'am, do you work in law?" A faint, almost tired smile crossed Maya's face. "I do." Cruz swallowed. "Federal court?" "Yes." Silence stretched across the driveway. Mercer looked between them, confusion tightening into realization. "You're Judge Reynolds?" he asked. "I am." The air changed instantly. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, like pressure releasing from a sealed container. Mercer stepped back half a pace without realizing it. "Well," he said, tone shifting, "if we'd known—" "That's not the point," Maya interrupted gently. Cruz glanced at Mercer. The entire energy of the stop had flipped. Moments ago, detention had been threatened. Now there was hesitation, awkwardness. Mercer cleared his throat. "We were responding to reports of suspicious activity." "And what about my behavior was suspicious?" Maya asked. Neither officer answered immediately. Cruz finally spoke. "Ma'am, I think there's been a misunderstanding." Maya held her gaze steady. "No," she said softly. "There hasn't." The words weren't angry. They were factual. Mercer's posture shifted again from assertive to defensive. "Well, Judge, we were just doing our jobs." "By assuming I didn't belong?" she asked. The question hung in the cool evening air. Across the street, a neighbor's phone was still recording. Cruz noticed it too. This wasn't private anymore. It was documented. Mercer nodded stiffly. "You're free to go." Maya looked down at her driveway. "I was never trying to leave." That sentence landed harder than anything else she had said. Because it was true. She hadn't been walking away. She hadn't been running. She had been home. And the officers knew it now. The word judge seemed to linger in the space between them. It changed everything, and at the same time, it shouldn't have changed anything at all. Officer Mercer stood straighter, but not an authority anymore. It was the posture of someone recalibrating in real time. "You're Judge Reynolds?" he repeated, as if confirming it would somehow soften what had already happened. "Yes," Maya answered calmly. Her tone hadn't shifted. No triumph, no sarcasm, just confirmation. Officer Cruz glanced back toward her cruiser, then at Mercer. The body cameras were still recording. The neighbor across the street was very obviously holding up a phone now. The quiet street felt smaller, tighter. Mercer cleared his throat. "Well, ma'am, if we had known your position," she met his eyes, "would that have made a difference?" The question landed without aggression. "It didn't need it." Mercer hesitated. "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" she asked. He looked briefly at Cruz, searching for assistance. Cruz didn't offer any. "We were responding to a complaint," Mercer said carefully. "We had to follow up. And you followed up by threatening to detain a homeowner for standing in her own driveway." Her words were measured, precise. Like testimony. Cruz shifted her weight uncomfortably. "Ma'am," Cruz said softly, "there was a report earlier this week about someone walking through the neighborhood. Was that report tied to this address?" Maya asked. "No." "Was it tied to me?" "No." "Did I match a description of a suspect in a crime?" Cruz paused. "No." Mercer's jaw tightened again, but this time it wasn't authority. It was exposure. Maya continued, her voice still even. "You escalated this encounter without articulating reasonable suspicion. You implied I was obstructing you by asking lawful questions, and you threatened detention." Mercer shifted slightly. "That wasn't the intent. Intent doesn't erase impact," she replied. Silence settled heavily over the driveway. The delivery car finally turned onto the street, a small sedan with a lighted sign on top. It slowed awkwardly, confused by the two patrol vehicles parked along the curb. The driver hesitated, unsure whether to approach. Maya glanced briefly at the car, then back at Mercer. "This is what unnecessary escalation looks like," she said quietly. Cruz stepped forward. "Ma'am, we apologize for the inconvenience." "Inconvenience?" Maya repeated. Cruz swallowed. "For the situation," Mercer nodded stiffly. "You're free to go." She held his gaze for a moment longer. "I was never detained lawfully," she said, "so I was never not free." Another silence. The delivery driver cautiously pulled into her driveway, stepping out with a paper bag in hand, eyes wide as he glanced between the officers and Maya. She took the bag, thanked him gently, and turned back toward the officers one final time. "You shouldn't need to know my title to respect my rights," she said. No one argued, because there was nothing left to argue. The power dynamic had shifted not because of who she was, but because of what had just been exposed. And this time, it was all on camera. By 8:15 the next morning, the footage had already made its way up the chain of command. It started quietly. A supervisor flagged the body cam file for routine review after seeing the address attached to the stop. The name in the report, Reynolds, Maya A., triggered a second look. Within hours, the chief of police was sitting in a closed office with the department's legal advisor and the head of internal affairs. The blinds were half drawn. The room felt smaller than usual. "Play it from the beginning," the chief said. The screen flickered to life. There she was, barefoot, phone in hand, standing in her driveway. The audio was clear. "Do you live here?" "Yes." "Can I see some identification?" The footage continued. Each question. Ach, Pause. Each escalation. The moment Mercer said, "Last warning." The moment she asked, "For what?" The legal advisor leaned back slowly in his chair. "That's a problem." "How bad?" the chief asked quietly. The advisor didn't answer immediately. He waited as the footage reached the moment Mercer threatened detention. Then the reveal. "You're Judge Reynolds?" The chief exhaled sharply through his nose. "Pause it." The screen froze on Mercer's face, authority draining into uncertainty. The room was silent for several seconds. "Was there any articulable reasonable suspicion?" the chief asked. Internal Affairs shook her head. "None documented beyond suspicious behavior." "That's not enough," the advisor said flatly. "Not for a detention threat." The chief rubbed his temples. "Has the footage leaked?" "Not yet," Internal Affairs replied. But neighbors were recording. As if on cue, the chief's desk phone buzzed. He ignored it. A second line lit up. Then a third. The advisor checked his own phone. "It's already circulating on social media." The chief closed his eyes briefly. What's the exposure? The advisor didn't sugarcoat it. Fourth Amendment violation. Potential unlawful detention. Discriminatory enforcement claim. If she files, this won't stay internal. The chief looked back at the frozen frame of the body cam. Mercer standing rigid. Maya calm, composed. Precisi. She's a federal judge, the chief muttered. The advisor shook his head slightly. That part actually doesn't matter legally. The chief looked up. What do you mean? If this interaction is unlawful for her, it's unlawful for anyone. That statement hung heavier than everything else, because it was true. A knock sounded on the door. Sir, a lieutenant said from the doorway. Local news is asking for comment. The chief looked back at the screen one last time. Pull Mercer off patrol effective immediately, he said quietly. Administrative leave pending review. The advisor nodded. And prepare for litigation. Outside the office, the department buzzed with whispers. Inside, the realization had already settled. This wasn't just about optics. It was about policy, and the camera had captured every second of it. That evening, the house felt different, not unsafe, not violated, just altered. Maya sat alone at her dining table, the container of pad thai still in the refrigerator, untouched from the night before. The porch light outside cast a soft reflection against the window. The same driveway, the same quiet street, but her sense of ease had shifted. Her phone buzzed periodically. Text messages from colleagues, missed calls from a court clerk, a brief message from the chief of police requesting a professional conversation. She silenced the phone. This wasn't about courtesy. It wasn't about apology. It wasn't even about embarrassment. It was about precedent. She replayed the moment in her mind, not emotionally, but analytically. The initial question, the demand for ID, the escalation, last warning, the threat of detention. She had spent years presiding over cases involving unlawful stops. She had written opinions citing Terry v. Ohio. She had ruled on Fourth Amendment suppression motions where officers failed to articulate reasonable suspicion. Now she had stood on the other side of it, and the difference was chilling. She had known her rights. She had the vocabulary to assert them calmly. She understood the legal boundaries instinctively. But what about the people who didn't? What about someone younger? Someone nervous? Someone without legal training? Someone who panicked when a patrol car stopped? Would they have been detained? Arrested? Charged? She folded her hands slowly on the table. This wasn't about personal offense. It was about systemic behavior. The knock at her door the next morning had been polite, a department liaison delivering a formal apology letter. The wording was careful, neutral. Miscommunication, routine follow-up, no harm intended. She read it twice, then placed it face down on the counter. Intent wasn't the issue. Authority exercised without justification was. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from a former law school classmate, now a civil rights attorney. Call me. Saw the footage. She stared at the screen for a moment. The footage. It had already spread further than she expected. Neighbors had uploaded short clips. The body cam review was reportedly underway. Social media commentary had begun dissecting the encounter frame by frame. She hadn't asked for public attention, but now that it existed, she had a choice. She could accept the apology, let it close quietly, return to her bench, resume life as if nothing had happened. Or she could treat it the same way she treated constitutional violations in her courtroom as matters requiring accountability. She stood and walked to the front window. Ashford Lane looked unchanged, children riding bikes, a dog walker passing by, the ordinary rhythm of suburban calm. But constitutional rights don't depend on zip codes. She turned away from the window, opened her laptop, drafted a single, concise email. Subject, representation inquiry, civil rights matter. She hesitated only briefly before pressing send. The decision wasn't emotional. It was deliberate. And once made, it was final. 3 weeks later, the steps of the federal courthouse looked different than they usually did on an ordinary Thursday morning. Satellite vans lined the curb. Microphones were clipped into place. Reporters rehearsed opening lines while camera operators adjusted focus and exposure against the late morning glare. This wasn't a criminal sentencing. It wasn't a corruption indictment. It was a civil filing. But the name attached to it had drawn national attention. At exactly 10 a.m., Maya Reynolds stepped up to the podium beside her attorney, David Ellison, a seasoned civil rights litigator, known for measured words and airtight filings. Maya wore a navy suit, neutral expression, no visible anger, no theatrics. She wasn't standing there as judge in the institutional sense. She was standing there as a citizen. Ellison adjusted the microphone. "Today," he began, "we are filing a $15.9 million federal civil rights lawsuit against Officer Daniel Mercer and the City of Brookdale Police Department." Cameras clicked rapidly. The amount wasn't random. It reflected constitutional claims, emotional distress, reputational harm, and the broader impact of unlawful policing practices. Ellison continued, "The complaint alleges violation of Fourth Amendment protections against unreasonable seizure, unlawful threat of detention without reasonable suspicion, and discriminatory enforcement." Reporters scribbled notes. "Body camera footage shows escalation without articulable probable cause. This case is not about title. It is not about position. It is about rights." He stepped back. Maya leaned slightly toward the microphone. Her voice was calm. "Constitutional protections are not conditional," she said. "They do not apply only when convenient. They do not depend on who you are, where you work, or whether an officer recognizes your name." A reporter called out, "Judge Reynolds, is this personal?" She paused briefly before answering. It became personal when authority was exercised without justification. Another question. "Did the department apologize?" "Yes," she said evenly. "But apologies do not reform systems." The footage had already been analyzed publicly by legal commentators. The moment Mercer said, "Last warning," the moment she asked, "For what?" The absence of any specific crime. Clips circulated across major networks. Legal analysts debated the threshold for reasonable suspicion. Former prosecutors weighed in. The department released a brief statement that afternoon. "We respect Judge Reynolds' decision to pursue legal remedies. The department is conducting an internal review." Behind closed doors, city attorneys began assessing risk exposure. $15.9 million wasn't just symbolic. It was leverage. Policy reform clauses were already drafted within the complaint: mandatory retraining, supervisory oversight requirements, transparent reporting mechanisms for residential stops. This lawsuit wasn't only financial, it was structural. As Maya stepped away from the podium, a final question followed her. "Do you believe this would have ended differently if you weren't a federal judge?" She didn't hesitate. "Yes." The simplicity of the answer echoed louder than any legal argument, because everyone understood what she meant. The filing wasn't retaliation. It was precedent-setting. And now, the matter would move from driveway confrontation to federal courtroom scrutiny, where evidence, not assumption, would decide the outcome. 6 months after the lawsuit was filed, the courtroom was full. Not packed in the dramatic, movie scene way, but full in the quiet, serious way that signals something significant is unfolding. City attorneys sat at one table. Officer Daniel Mercer sat beside them, no longer in uniform, no badge, no cruiser parked outside. Just a gray suit that didn't quite fit right at the shoulders. Across the aisle, Maya Reynolds sat beside her counsel, composed, focused, not as a judge presiding, but as a plaintiff seeking accountability. This wasn't criminal court, it was civil, but the weight of constitutional review carries its own gravity. On the large screen in front of the jury, the body camera footage played again. "Do you live here?" "Yes." "Can I see some identification?" "For what reason?" The jurors watched carefully. No commentary, no dramatic music, just raw footage. The moment Mercer said, "Last warning," the moment he threatened detention, the absence of any articulated crime. Ellison stood and addressed the court. "Officer Mercer, at the time you threatened to detain my client, what specific criminal statute did you believe she was violating?" Mercer shifted slightly. "I believed she was obstructing my investigation." "Your investigation into what?" "Suspicious activity." "Define that activity." "She was standing outside." A pause. Ellison didn't rush. "Standing outside is a crime?" "No." "Did you observe trespassing?" "No." "Did you observe attempted burglary?" "No." "Did dispatch tie to a reported suspect?" "No." "Then what, specifically, justified detention?" Silence. The courtroom was still enough that the faint hum of the ventilation system could be heard. Mercer finally answered, She refused to provide ID. Ellison nodded slowly. And a citizen must provide ID when lawfully detained. And she was lawfully detained? Mercer hesitated. No. The admission was small, but decisive. The city's attorney attempted to reframe. Officer Mercer was acting in good faith, responding to community concerns. Ellison replied calmly. Good faith does not override constitutional limits. Maya never interrupted. She never reacted visibly, but every word echoed in the courtroom. The judge overseeing the case, not Maya, of course addressed the jury in measured tones about reasonable suspicion standards and unlawful seizure definitions. Outside the courtroom, media analysts debated the broader implications. If this encounter violated the Fourth Amendment for a federal judge, it violated it for anyone. Settlement negotiations intensified after the deposition transcript circulated. The city understood the risk. A jury verdict could exceed the requested amount and trigger federal oversight review. Within weeks, the city agreed to a structured settlement. The financial terms were confidential, but publicly confirmed to be substantial. More importantly, policy reforms were mandated. Clear articulation requirements before ID demands. Supervisor review for residential investigatory stops. Implicit bias retraining. Public stop data transparency reports. Mercer resigned prior to final disciplinary proceedings. In the courtroom, when final paperwork was signed, there was no applause, no victory speech, just quiet acknowledgement that the system had been tested and corrected, because this wasn't about winning. It was about accountability. By early autumn, Ashford Lane looked exactly as it always had. The maple trees shifted from deep green to amber and rust. Lawns were trimmed. Porch lights glowed on schedule. Children waited for school buses at the corner in the mornings. From the outside, nothing seemed different, but the quiet carried a new awareness. The Brookdale Police Department had implemented its revised policies. Officers were now required to document articulable reasonable suspicion before requesting identification during residential encounters. Supervisors reviewed body camera footage weekly. Community transparency reports were published online. It wasn't revolutionary, but it was measurable. Officer Daniel Mercer's name faded gradually from headlines. His resignation had been brief, almost understated. No ceremony, no official farewell, just paperwork, civil service separation. The department never labeled him malicious. The official phrasing described procedural errors and judgment lapses. But the footage spoke more clearly than press releases ever could. For Maya Reynolds, life resumed its familiar rhythm. Morning court sessions, written opinions, law clerks filtering through stacks of briefs, arguments over precedent and statutory interpretation. She never mentioned the lawsuit from the bench. She never referenced it in chambers. She didn't need to. The experience had not hardened her. It had clarified her. One evening, months later, she stood once again at the edge of her driveway waiting for a delivery. The air was cooler now, crisp. A patrol car turned onto Ashford Lane. For a brief second, instinct tightened her shoulders, but the cruiser drove past. No slowing, no lingering headlights, no assumptions. She exhaled slowly. Across the street, a neighbor gave her a small nod. Not dramatic, not apologetic, just acknowledgement. The viral clips had faded from trending feeds, but the conversation they sparked remained active in civic meetings, city council sessions, and community forums. The lawsuit had never been about money alone. The $15.9 million figure had drawn headlines, yes, but the structural reform clauses embedded in the settlement carried deeper weight. Accountability isn't loud. It doesn't always look like dramatic courtroom verdicts. Sometimes it looks like revised training manuals, rewritten policy language, supervisors asking harder questions, officers articulating clearer reasons, rights clarified on paper so they don't have to be argued in driveways. One afternoon after court adjourned, a young law student approached Maya outside the courthouse. "Your case," the student said quietly, "made me want to study constitutional law." Maya smiled gently. "It wasn't my case," she replied. "It was everyone's, because that was the truth. What happened on Ashford Lane wasn't extraordinary. That was the point. It was ordinary. An assumption, an escalation, a threat of detention without cause. The difference was documentation. The difference was knowledge. The difference was someone refusing to surrender rights out of fear. As the seasons shifted again, Ashford Lane remained peaceful. But the peace felt earned now, not because nothing happened, but because something did, and it was corrected. Authority still drove those streets, but so did accountability, and that balance made all the difference.